Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this PwC and Risk Minds webinar on reinvention, resilience, and growth. So look, today we will be discussing the extent of macro trends and, importantly, the impact of technology as well as talent in reshaping risk management and the banking sector as a whole. So I'm Jane Walcott and I lead our financial services risk practice at PwC in the UK. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by some of our experts across Europe. So I have here with me today Mark Batten, our UK banking leader, Lee Bates, our AI risk leader, and Alex Burns from Switzerland, who is head of financial services risk and compliance and internal audit services. Now, in recent years, we know the banking risk landscape has changed considerably. With global trends and disruptive forces, we can name many, whether that be the pandemic, geopolitics, climate change, and of course, technology advancements. They're all having a profound impact on banks' risk profiles. And we also know that these macro trends will continue to accelerate and compound on one another in the near term. And that does create challenges and uncertainty. So whilst there is much for risk leaders and practitioners to work on to ensure they continue to support any bank's resilience, its forward-looking risk management agenda, and be the right business partner to the banking strategy and growth imperative, we need to reflect on where the challenges are, but also where the opportunities are. And that I hope we will bring to life today for you. So let me start with Mark. Welcome. It'd be great to hear from you on your thoughts on the macroeconomic challenges and opportunities that risk leaders in the banking and financial services sector are today facing.
Thanks, Jane, and hello, everybody. It's great to be back with the Risk Minds community again after the excitement of the end of last year in London. So great to see everyone. So yeah, Jane, what I'll maybe talk about a little bit is this system of global megatrends that we see around us. It's something that fascinates me, and indeed it's something that we in PwC have really focused on putting at the heart of our strategy and how we go to market with our clients around the world. So what are these megatrends? And these are things we're all familiar with, right? It's the impact of climate change. Both the physical risk we see of rising temperatures, but also the opportunities that presents for those of us in financial services in the real economy. It's the impact of technology, both the huge opportunity that technology presents us all and the way in which it's transformed our lives, but also the disruptive impact and some of the risks and challenges that we see unfolding around us in the world all of the time. Demographic shifts. When we look at some Western economies, the challenges that an aging economy presents in terms of things like healthcare and pension provision, and then we look in other parts of the world where we see huge portions of the population that are becoming of working age, and the search for opportunity, the search for jobs, and indeed this sometimes unequal distribution of opportunity and supply. That relates to both skills in the workforce, but also to things like raw materials and other means of production. And then the last couple of trends that I'd include within that sort of framework, that's fracturing and some of the social impact. So we've all seen the impact of geopolitical fracturing around the world and how that's manifesting in some of these short-term events, and indeed how that then can manifest itself in social disruption. One of the things that absolutely fascinates me is the way in which these megatrends are interconnected and accelerating. They don't operate in isolation of each other; they feed into each other. If you think about things like climate and technology, why do we have issues around decarbonisation and the need to address climate change? A lot of that is to do with technology. If we look at some of the social issues we see and some of the fracturing, again, we think about the role of AI, the role of information and technology, and the ability to spread disinformation and how those things feed in. And if we think about recent years, how this system has really accelerated, and that interconnectedness has accelerated as well. How does that impact us? We're all familiar with how these trends can then feed through into some of the short-term crises and challenges we see around us. As we start this year, everybody globally is very focused on the macroeconomic environment. Again, broad set of issues driven by some of those mega trends have led to this period of higher inflation, which has fed through into higher interest rates. And we see a lot of economic volatility and uncertainty as we sit here at the start of 24. Again, geopolitical unrest. We're all very familiar with, some of the situations that we see unfolding around the world, including military unrest and war, and how that then, again, feeds into the economic environment. We've had to deal with the pandemic and the results of that, and of course that has fed through into some of those macro trends like the inflationary pressures we've seen. We can't go through any conversation at the moment without talking about technology disruption, and particularly generative AI. The opportunities that creates, but also the threats. And all of the time we're seeing this acceleration of some of the physical risks of climate change and climate events that are manifesting themselves all around the world. And for me, in a financial services context, all of these have a really significant and immediate impact on financial services. If we look at how financial services organizations, banks are having to respond to that global macro environment, both in a period of higher inflation, higher interest rates, and then what a softening of that interest rate environment will mean for asset prices, for financial services organization performance. And we look at things like the climate situation. There's a lot we have to do in terms of sustainability reporting, the disclosure obligations, the regulatory responses to these challenges present us. Physical risk in our value chains, in our credit risk management value chains, but also this huge opportunity that is presented to financial services to play this critical role in financing the net zero transformation, in financing climate technology, and helping real economies go on their net zero transformation agendas. And I think this, as I said at the start, this system of megatrends continually accelerating both the impact and the interconnectedness. We don't know where the next crisis or challenge will come from. Will that be another health crisis akin to the pandemic? Will it be an emerging challenge for scarce resources? Will it be an unpredicted conflict, or will it be an institution in crisis? Again, with the extent of fracturing and some of the social disruption we see institutions that have been so critical to the success of the global economy that could come under pressure. We don't know where it's going to come from. What I also find fascinating as we sit at the start of FY24 or calendar 24 is this unprecedented period of democratic change that we're going to go through. I think we're going to see the greatest number of democratic elections that we've seen almost in history around the world, and how will those processes unfold? Will we see the populist agenda coming through? What will that mean for governments, and therefore again things like regulatory policy, things like climate, things like business? So a really dynamic year ahead of us that I can see.
It will be a busy, complex and very dynamic year, probably not just 1 year. But look, I just want to bring it back a little bit more to financial services and perhaps the banking sector from your perspective. So what do you think the real takeaway is for financial services and banking in light of the macro lens?
Sure, Jane. I think for me, this comes back to really one key point that I'll make, which is really about building capability. We know we live in this world of these accelerating mega trends. We know how they manifest themselves in challenge and opportunity for global economies, for financial services organizations. I think we need to continue to take a look at organizations and think about how we're building the capability to understand these issues, to be able to analyze the world in which we live, to be able to think about the impact on strategy, to be able to build responses, to be able to build playbooks, to build agility and resilience into the way in which we manage risk and we manage these organizations. And then the ability to link that to things like financial planning, to scenario analysis, to capital management and stress testing, and then link all of that back into real strategic business decision making. So for me, it's a capability build, or a continued capability build.
And I agree with you, Mark, on that context of building the right type of capability, but that to some extent one could construe as an eyes view. So I'm quite interested actually to hear a little bit more from you. As we both know, PwC has done a recent global survey to a number of CROs across the globe. What did that actually tell us?
Sure. So our global risk survey that we launched at the end of last year, I think we surveyed nearly 4,000 participants, CROs with a fantastic global footprint. So some really rich insight, I think, that we got from that in really sort of three core areas. One is being able to just get a sense of what the biggest risks CROs around the world think they face. The second is being able to unpack the opportunity and the risks arising from this accelerating impact of technological disruption. And then third, and perhaps in some ways even the most interesting, was the ability that we had from the data set that we generated to be able to really identify what top performers were doing around how they respond to this environment and how they put risk management at the heart of their strategy and opportunity creation. So maybe just take a minute, unpack a couple of those themes. So the first was around, what risks are top of mind. And I don't think there'll be any huge surprises in terms of what risks are top of mind. The macroeconomic environment was absolutely the biggest risk, or the most prescient risk that CROs thought they faced. Second was technology, and we'll come back to this point of whether technology is a risk or an opportunity, but second was technology and the disruptive impact of those technologies, and the need to really think about the risks that they're exposing organizations and their financial services organizations and their customer base to. The third, and I've referenced this, was geopolitical risk. It's interesting, I think, when we were having some of these conversations 18 months, 2 years ago, it felt like it was the time of geopolitical disruption. We wondered if, you roll forward 18 months, that picture might have changed. And of course, for me, it hasn't at all, right? The geopolitical risks remain absolutely front and center. And then fourth was the impact of climate and climate change. Now, I'll also point to another survey that we just completed, if I can, Jane, which was our global CEO survey. Again, that was launched the beginning of this year. We used a Davos event often to highlight the findings of the survey, and some really interesting data points just to unpack a bit more about the climate imperative. So 30% of financial services CEOs around the world see climate as absolutely crucial for fundamental corporate reinvention, for business reinvention. So strategy through product, through distribution, through risk management, it's fundamental impact. You see full half of all financial services firms developing climate-friendly product-based solutions. And again, half of FS firms fundamentally focused on upskilling to both, again, to this point of being able to leverage the opportunity around climate and sustainable finance, but also to be managing the risks that present themselves in the value chain. And really interestingly, 30% of our surveyed FS CEOs highlighted that they had accepted lower returns in exchange for a positive impact on climate. So you can see the development of climate-friendly products with a sustainable impact coming through in pricing of product, which I thought was really, really interesting. So that gives you a sense of some of the risks and this response to climate. I said at the start, Jane, that I'd talk a little bit about the balance between risk and opportunity. And let's go back to that second risk that was identified in those areas of focus, which is technology. So what for me was really, really interesting was that although technology was number 2 in the list of risks, when you measured the extent to which organizations saw technology as a risk versus an opportunity, the extent to which the impact of technology was seen as an opportunity by far outweighed the risk. So we're seeing technology as the second biggest risk that we face, but the sense of opportunity and technologies that were highlighted, familiar to this audience, I'm sure, generative AI, quantum computing, blockchain, the impact of metaverse, all familiar topics for financial services professionals. But the opportunity far outweighs the risk. And then just finally, to close on that, Jane, I think I'll go back to this concept of risk pioneers. So in the survey data that we were able to generate, we looked at a couple of different sort of archetypes around the way in which organizations think about risk. So is it seen purely as a value protection activity, or is it seen as a value creation activity? When we think about automation and technology, do organizations take a purely technology-led approach, or do they balance and give equal weight and priority to the human-led aspect, so the investment in skills, the investment in people, the investment in engagement, alongside technology? And how do you bring those things together? So we were able to identify from the data a relatively small set of what we term these risk pioneers. I think it was around 5% of respondents, who, if they took an approach that really emphasized the value creation opportunity and also put equal weight to the people agenda and to the leverage of technology. They were able to identify significantly differentiated risk outcomes. So what were those? I think it was around significantly higher confidence in balancing the growth agenda with risk. So balancing this value creation idea versus value protection. Significantly more likely to see these disruptive technologies such as Gen AI as a value creating opportunity rather than a risk generating situation. And again, significantly more likely to take risk in the creation of opportunity. So I think this idea that if you focus on the opportunity that risk management can bring to value creation, and you balance people and tech, then building this confidence for a seat at the table, for a seat at the table in strategic decision making, and getting better outcomes from the management of risk.
Brilliant. That pulls together a number of strands, but actually I'm going to bring Lee into the conversation now, because the context of the importance of technology, both from a disruption lens and an opportunistic lens. Lee, I'm really interested to hear a little bit about the types of conversations you're having with risk leaders on the topic of technology and importantly AI. We can't ignore that. So what are we learning there?
Yeah, sure, Jane. Thank you. And I'll build on some of what Mark's just talked about as well on the technology topic. And look, certainly in this exciting time right now in the world of AI and technology more generally, the speed of innovation is not showing any signs of slowing down. And most recently, we've seen some really innovative developments. So just last week, OpenAI released Sora, which makes it even easier now to create realistic video content from text instructions. So you can see that the pace of this innovation is just really moving at a phenomenal rate. And it's clear that AI is one of the most powerful technologies ever developed. So, and it has so many potential applications across business and society. Mark referenced our PwC CEO survey. And in that, there's some interesting statistics around AI. Over 70% of global CEOs expected that generative AI will significantly change the way their company creates and delivers value in the next 3 years. But look, as risk professionals, we need to consider a whole host of risks to realize that value. And the breadth of these risks is now driving an even greater need for risk professionals to collaborate across organizations to manage overall enterprise-wide risk. So it's certainly a much more complex risk landscape today, Jane.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and very much aligns with Mark's context on the macro trend agenda. So, but you know, we talk about collaboration, within an organization, and you highlighted very carefully then a point around across organizations. So let's just go into that a little bit more, right? Is it government and regulators that you were thinking about there, and what is their role in addressing some of the risks, in particular around the AI agenda? Yeah,
that's a great point. And actually, there's been a lot of significant progress on AI risk and safety over the past few months. So that ranges from the UK government's role. They hosted an AI safety summit last year, to the more recently EU AI Act, which is actually the first comprehensive legal framework for regulating AI across the EU. And in the US, President Biden issued an executive order a few months ago setting out his response to managing AI risk in the US. So these regulatory and legal interventions are directly aimed at addressing concerns about how this technology is not only being developed, but how it's being deployed and used across society. And Mark actually talked about some of the kind of global macro trends that we're faced with, and one of those is political uncertainty. And according to a recent World Economic Forum report, manipulated and falsified information is now the most severe short-term AI risk the world faces. So this is even more magnified by generative AI, so the ability to produce what's known as synthetic content. So deepfake videos, voice cloning, production of counterfeit websites are just a few examples. So there's clearly much more we need to do on the AI safety agenda to address some of these risks, Jane.
Thank you. And just to clarify to the audience, this is not a deep fake video or voice cloning. This is actually us from PwC. Let me bring Mark back in, actually, on a more serious point. How, Mark, in your view, should risk leaders really be thinking about this challenge of the macroeconomic lens, but also geopolitical, and then this disruptive technology that's hitting fast?
Yeah, for me, Jane, that comes back to this point around capability. And I think building, making systematic, making repeatable, the ability to scan the horizon for these, for these emerging risks, for these megatrend related risks, and then to embed your response to that into your day-to-day risk processes, whether that's risk identification, risk analysis, risk mitigation, whether it's stress testing, scenario analysis. If we've learned anything over recent years, it's that the pace of change is accelerating. The impact on events that we see around the world is increasing in frequency and severity of impact. And accordingly, I think it's about building the capability to understand these issues and challenges, and then to build that into and make ever more systematic your risk management and business strategy responses to those challenges.
Thank you. Lee, you highlighted in particular misinformation, disinformation risks, but there are many risks associated with AI and especially Gen AI. Can you bring a few of those to life for us?
Yeah, of course. And look, we could spend a long time talking about all the various risks, not only related to AI, but also broader technology. But let me just kind of pull out a few examples. And I think, look, some of these aren't new risks, but they've been amplified through generative AI and the technology that sits underneath them around large language models, or LLMs. But let me just share a few examples. So maybe bias and fairness is the first one. So this is our ability to prevent AI systems from inheriting bias, which could be embedded within data, which has been used to train these models. Right, and that's quite a complex process to go through to ensure that the data is without bias and ensures the right outcomes. The second is cyber. So AI can be open to attack by bad actors. For example, a manipulation of model behavior, data leakage, or IP theft. And then that links into privacy. So language models in particular are trained on huge volumes of unstructured data from many sources, ranging from the internet to all sorts of other documents and other sources. And that raises concerns about if personal identifiable data is contained within those data feeds and the potential for misuse. And I could go on to talk about data risks, legal risks, IP infringement, third parties. There are many to consider, Jane.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's go to the positive, right? So what do we think the opportunity is for risk professionals by taking advantage of these types of technologies?
Yeah, so, and I'll pick up on what Mark opened with around this kind of value creation agenda. I think there are some really interesting risk use cases being developed using generative AI today, largely focused, I would say, on productivity and efficiency improvements across risk functions. And obviously managing the risks of AI is top of mind, as we've discussed, but actually exploring how risk functions can deploy this technology into their risk processes is a huge opportunity. And there's some great examples of what firms are doing already today in this space. So let me just share a couple with you right now. The first I'll share is around enhancing regulatory horizon scanning. So using generative AI to quickly analyze and summarize regulatory text, regulated documents, to perform an impact assessment, to then determine uplifts in policy, governance, and control enhancements that may be needed. Even right the way through to generating controls and generating controls testing plans, which is something we're working on at PwC. The second example I'll share relates more broadly to conduct risk and using generative AI to analyze customer complaints data, joined to social media, sentiment, and other data feeds to quickly identify potential conduct risks and take fast corrective action. And there are many more examples we could discuss, but what I would say is that these are all relatively narrow risk use cases. And I see a much bigger opportunity here in the transformative use of data, technology, and AI across risk functions to better inform business strategy. So much more on that value creation agenda that Mark talked to a few moments ago. And an example of that might be, surfacing real-time insights on your overall risk profile against industry metrics, against news feeds, sentiment, to better understand how macroeconomic conditions may impact risks to better inform your business strategy. And actually, our recent PwC Global Risk Survey, Mark mentioned it, showed how leading organizations, these risk pioneers, are already using data, technology, cloud, AI to drive that value creation agenda. So my advice on this is don't delay, but do so with a clear strategy across people, process, and technology to really embed sustainable change.
Okay, so we've talked about the macro trends, we've talked about technology. I want to bring Alex to the table because regardless of all of that, there is an incredibly important agenda around talent that cannot be forgotten in this conversation. So, Alex, really interested in what you're seeing and your perspective on not only the challenges, but the opportunities for the talent agenda, especially in the context of the role of the risk function and its professionals.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. So you said it, very much challenging times ahead for all of us in the industry. It's what the World Economic Forum, I think, a Global Risk Report is actually very aptly calling a duo of a dangerous crisis, which is the climate change and the conflict, and all of that coupled also with the accelerating technological change we've heard from Lee, and the economic and social uncertainty. So, a lot of volatility, uncertainty, complexity that the risk function will have to navigate, but at the same time, a huge opportunity to get it right. And we want to spend some time on what some of those things could be that getting right could mean. I think it boils down for me to taking risk intelligently, and to do that, you need to be adaptive. You need to be able to reinvent to what is happening. We've heard from Mark is that some of these megatrends that we're seeing, it's not entirely clear how they will manifest and to what speed. So that reinvention, that adaptation is going to be absolutely crucial to protect and create that value that we're looking for from a risk perspective. And we very much believe that it has to be technology powered, yes, but it has to be human led. And it boils down to that. We've also heard from Lee about the risk pioneers that we identified in our global risk survey, and what we saw there in pursuit of the opportunity that I just talked about, that these pioneers were significantly more likely to invest, in addition to the investments in the tech, in the data and the AI, to invest in their teams. And so I wanted to spend a few moments articulating how that could look like, and that investment in the team. So the first piece is, we heard it from Mark, is reframing risk as an opportunity. So we're used to the more traditional risk mitigation measures, the regulatory compliance. One of our survey respondents actually said, and I thought this was an interesting point, saying, an approach based purely on adherence to regulatory minimum standards and to, regulatory compliance and avoiding financial loss, that is a risk in itself in today's environment. Sums it up nicely. And instead, focusing on areas such as, how can you increase customer trust, customer experience? That's a risk agenda, in my view. How can you identify new commercial opportunities through risk taking? How can you improve financial performance? So that proactive taking risk and creating opportunities out of the risk taking, rather than prioritizing safe and low risk strategies, I think will be crucial in this environment. The second piece that I wanted to highlight is the fixing the leadership disconnect. And what we mean by that is, we saw that most organizations that responded to our global risk survey actually felt that they were doing a pretty good job of managing this risk and reward, but we did see quite some differences in terms of the responses between the different functions. So overall, the risk functions themselves were more optimistic about the value they provided versus the CEOs. And so then the CEOs didn't necessarily always feel that the risk reward was always there, and the risk function was consistently demonstrating these value-adding behaviors. And so, in our view, that's clearly something that needs to be resolved if risk management wants to have a greater role in this strategic conversation, and be more proactive rather than reactive to the threats. And so, making sure risk function has fosters greater collaboration on all levels with leadership and the wider business, and is in these strategic conversations much earlier on rather than at the end, when the decisions happen. The third piece, and we'll come back to that later, Jane, is on the development of skills and capabilities and the upskilling around that. Before we do that, I'd like to go into the final piece, which for me is that the growth mindset. So one of the topics, and I mentioned it before, is that the risk environment is going to be very dynamic. None of us has the playbook, and so there needs to be this mindset or this culture of being safe to fail. And so making sure that when failure does happen, which inevitably will in that environment, there's an ability to discuss those failures, learn from those failures, and also talk about them. And this is something that the risk pioneers more strongly focused on than everyone else that responded to our global risk survey. So I think that's learning for a lot of our banking and financial services clients overall.
That's fascinating, Alex. I'm going to ask Lee a question now, actually, listening to that. I want to take it back into this AI agenda. So Lee, I mean, you do a lot of work across the market on helping organizations how to embed AI into the risk practice and wider parts of an organization. So as you've been involved in that, what are the types of skills do you think are needed to really help push and progress organizations with the AI agenda?
Yeah, sure. I think, let me first say, kind of adopting AI brings a number of talent-related challenges, but it will depend on where organizations are today in their own journey of using AI. So, for example, those organizations that already have AI expertise, AI technical skills, will more easily be able to build generative AI skills such as prompt engineering, data curation, language model fine-tuning, for example, because they already have a basis of AI skills already. Now, firms with fewer AI experts will need to enhance their capabilities into some of this more newer technology through training and recruitment, etc., which is not a small task. But my final point would be, don't overlook the broader change management skills needed to really embed sustainable change, including culture and ways of working. So it's not just about the technical skills, it's also about the softer skills to really manage this change and embed into an organization.
Thank you, Lee, and I think that's really important. So Alex, can I bring you back in, actually, because upskilling talent in the risk space more broadly is really important, right? You can't just focus it on specific technical skills associated with certain disruptive technologies, right? We can't just do that. So what is it that you would say are some of the other focus areas that risk functions and risk leaders need to think about in their upskilling agendas?
Absolutely, Jane, and I fully agree with what Lee's just mentioned. I think the first piece is making it a focus. So that was something, again, we saw the difference between the risk pioneers in how they responded to this question, where 60% said they were making risk preparedness and upskilling a priority, compared to 30%. So there's clearly an opportunity in there. In terms of the topics, we've touched on a few, but just to reiterate ones. So I think the first piece is the horizon scanning, the emerging risks. So there's going to be a lot of change, a lot of dynamic behavior happening in the risk landscape. We do not know what will materialize and how. So being able to identify and manage this new emerging risk, associated with the technology change, the geopolitics that we talked about. So being able to articulate that on all levels of the risk function and being able to navigate that, being connected to the industry, being connected to outside of the industry, and having that skill set, I think is crucial. Not surprisingly, the tech skills still something that needs to happen and more consistently, be that data analytics, be that AI or Gen AI specifically, and the focus on that real-time insight perspective, where we're not there yet, but also automating and digitizing controls and frameworks, still something that can be further worked on. And for me, it's the technology is about the outcome. that we need to think about in terms of risk. It's about honing the ability to analyze, interpret, visualize, and communicate results. It's not about the tech itself, but it's how you use it in risk decision making, which I think is crucial. Speaking of risk decision making, the third point I would highlight is the strategic thinking and business acumen. Still a way to go for many organizations, being able to really align to business goals, market developments, market trends. Be absolutely critical to link to and connect with leadership, understanding what is important to them, and being a strategic player when it matters is something that risk professionals at all levels need to be able to follow. Connected to that as well, the fourth point I want to make is around stakeholder management and communication. To be able to articulate and communicate risk and opportunity in this very rapidly changing environment, being able to communicate with impact, being able to communicate to leadership and stakeholders, things like board presence, being able to bring across complex technical topics in a way that it resonates with the decision makers, and also how to do so in times of crisis. So how do you bring across the points that matter in the moments that they matter and be listened to in the risk context, I think is a skill set that needs to be further honed and developed. And the final piece is we heard from Lee is ethical decision making. So a lot of these technological advances will come with really unprecedented challenges and ethical challenges as well, where we'll all be expected to do the right thing. But in many cases, maybe what the right thing is will not be as clear cut. So to make sure risk professionals are able to articulate some of those challenges and guide the organizations through some of those dilemmas, I think is going to be, again, a critical factor going forward, and one we shouldn't forget. Jane.
Thank you, Alex. And ending there on an incredibly important point in terms of all of our skills on that ethical decision-making agenda and the purpose in trust, which is so important across the banking and financial services sector. So look, I'm very conscious of time actually, and so we're nearing the end of our discussion. So I think perhaps I could turn to each of you for a quick sum up in terms of what would be your top takeaway to our audience today. And Mark, can I ask you that first?
Sure, Jane. I'm going to go back to this point on capability. We've heard about the impact of all of these trends and the challenges they present. So for me, it's about building capability in people, in systems, in process, so you can embed your response to these challenges in a systematic fashion, both around value creation and value protection.
Brilliant. Lee, your thought.
So we've talked a lot about AI, and I would say to fully realize the potential of AI, my advice is to accelerate implementing the right foundations, including how you execute AI in a responsible, ethical, trusted and safe way. Delivering experimental use cases in a sandbox environment will get you so far, but it doesn't mean you'll fully unlock the benefits until you really scale and embed this into your organization's process and ways of working. So back to Mark's point around this value creation agenda.
Brilliant. Alex, final thought from you.
Yes, so I think the risk function will have huge opportunity to play a really strategic role in this going forward. Or if not, then risk becoming irrelevant to the conversation. So I think it's important to prioritize risk preparedness upskilling and focus as much on behaviors and mindset as on the technological training.
Brilliant. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining me today, and to our audience for listening in. For me, there are three things, three T's: the trends, the technology, and the talent. And you can't really look at one without looking at the others. I think importantly, in the context of pace, it's really important that the risk professional leads through with proactive action. The macro trends are not going away, and it is really important that we as risk professionals in all our roles make sure that we're very aligned to helping on the growth strategies, as well as the traditional role of the risk officer. So I hope you remember trends, tech and talent. There was a lot in the discussion today. So if you would like to hear more, discuss further, go deeper, please do reach out to myself and all our colleagues. And we hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you.